Welcome to today's episode of Redundancy Matters, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Abby Birch. Abby is a financial wellbeing and money expert with 25 years of experience as a qualified financial advisor. She's also a coach and a trainer, and she helps organisations reduce financial stress, improve wellbeing, and build financial confidence. And I'm really excited to be joined by Abby today because this is a topic that we haven't covered before on the podcast. And we're going to be talking all about financial wellbeing in the context of redundancy. So welcome, Abby.
Thank you very much, June. A pleasure to be here.
We're looking forward to having a discussion all about financial wellbeing and how that can support people who are managing redundancies as well as those people who are affected by it. Abby, that was a really quick introduction from me. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell the listeners a bit more about you and your background?
Yeah, thanks, June. I was a financial advisor for many years and I worked with individuals who were high net worth and who had money that they wanted to invest to build more wealth. But I realised that in doing that, I wasn't really making that much of a difference to individuals' lives and that there's a huge, what we call the advice gap in the UK. And there's this huge swathe of people who need some help and support with their money, but can't access traditional financial advice, as it were. And I realised that I'd really like to support those people, which is where the coaching came in, really, because it's a much more accessible way for people to be able to access help and support around their finances. And then from that, looking at coaching individuals, people have started to look towards their employers more and more for support and help and guidance around their financial situation. So I moved more into the corporate financial education in the workplace to help support that. And I think one of the key areas you mentioned today is about redundancy is that is quite a huge financial shock for people when they're told that they've been made redundant. And it's a really good opportunity for organisations to actually support people and to show that they care more about, it's not just about them working for them, but they can actually help and support them through that transition.
Oh, that's really interesting. Your journey from, as you say, working with people who had money to invest through to educating people who wouldn't necessarily have had access. And I think that financial well-being and that education piece is something that we can all benefit from. And absolutely, as you said there, as well as an emotional roller coaster of redundancy, there's also the financial implications, which are very real for many people. So looking forward to exploring the ideas and the thoughts and some of the insights that HR professionals or leaders listening to this episode can help people with it without going into the realms of financial advice, which is clearly somewhere that people aren't qualified to do. Wonderful. The podcast is called Redundancy Matters, and I always ask the guests this. Why does redundancy matter to you?
So I personally have been made redundant twice in my career, and I've had two very different experiences. The first one was I worked for a major high street bank. I'd been a financial advisor for them for many years, and our roles were changing quite considerably. And with change, as people don't often always like change that comes along. So my whole team were really looking forward to being made redundant and put our names up almost. Please, can we be made redundant? Because we don't want to be doing the ongoing role. And so that was one experience. And I'd been with the company and a major high street bank for a long time. And so I had a reasonable payout from that. So that took away a lot of the financial stress that we're talking about, because I knew that I had a good buffer to be able to go away and work out what I wanted to do next. We were also put on gardening leave. So again, quite a long, I think it was about 6 months we were on gardening leave. So again, a lot of time to be able to prepare mentally and financially and work out what our next steps were. So that was a really, really good experience. And on the flip side, that I got made redundant, which is what led me to work for myself now and do what I'm doing now. I got made redundant about 3 years ago. And that was a slightly different experience in the fact that we were a startup company. We had funding that was taken away and it literally happened overnight. So we had a meeting on like a Thursday and we were told, and by the Monday, we no longer had a job. And because I hadn't been working for them for so long, the payout wasn't as big and it was a bit more stressful whilst I tried to work out what I wanted to do. Now, it's worked out well for me because I've continued and built something from that experience and become self-employed, which is totally different. So I can see both sides of the story where we welcomed the redundancy versus it was a bit of a shock and what am I going to do next?
Yeah, that's really interesting, both ends of that spectrum. And even for those people, and I work with a variety of clients who may be financially stable and they may have been with their employer for a reasonable time, and there may be an enhanced redundancy payment. Those people will still be naturally looking for some element of guidance in terms of what's the best thing to do with their money, as well as those people who, as you say, have been with a company for a very short period of time, not financially stable, hardly anything to go off, and the financial pressures are very real. So it's really interesting that you can see that from both sides.
I
So
was lucky. I'd actually worked for the organisation for long enough to be eligible for statutory redundancy, but there were quite a few of us within the startup environment that weren't, and that they were not going to get anything at all other than their notice period.
that is a situation which, as a HR professional, you really feel for people in that situation. And I know as we go along, we'll talk about some of the things that we can offer as support. So we talked a bit about the fact that you specialize in financial well-being, but what does that actually mean? Tell us a bit more about financial well-being.
So, financial well-being, there's a quite a good description of financial well-being, which is financial well-being is about feeling secure and in control. It's about making the most of your money from day to day and dealing with the unexpected and being on track for a healthy financial future. So, financially resilient, confident, and empowered. But to translate that into everyday speak, when we're talking about security, and today is about being able to afford the day-to-day things like your mortgage, your rent, your food, how you get to work. And when we're looking into the future with the security, is about dealing with the unexpected, things like having an emergency fund so that if you suddenly get made redundant, you've got some money that's there as a buffer, or if something happens that you're not expecting, the boiler breaking down, that's very apt this week in the freezing cold, isn't it? That you've got some money to be able to fall back onto to help you through those unexpected financial shocks. But then we also talk about choices. So choices today are things like being able to afford to go out for dinner or go on holiday, having that extra money on top of your day-to-day costs that you have to, that are non-negotiable is how I would describe them. On top of that you can be able to afford to pay Netflix, go for dinner, go for holiday, those kind of things. But again, when you look into the future, those choices are your own financial goals. So when you're going to retire, have you got enough money put aside into your pension? Or if you're trying to buy a house, at the opposite end of that kind of scale, have you got money put aside to be able to pay your deposit? So if you've got all of those four things together, you normally pretty financial well-being is pretty secure, and you should feel quite good about your money. And why that's important is that financial well-being is considered to be one of the four pillars of overall well-being. So you've got physical, mental, social, and the last one is your financial. Now, some people would describe that as like almost the foundation to the other three pillars, that because without financial well-being, without money, you can't do any of the other things. So you can't go to the gym, and you can't look after your house because you might not be able to afford the right food, for instance. Social is another one. You might not be able to afford to go out with friends or spend time with your family or drive and do the things that you want to be able to do. And with the mental health one, money and mental health are intrinsically linked. So your money situation can really affect your mental health. So that really comes into redundancy. A sudden financial shock can really affect your mental health. If you're suffering with poor mental health, that can really affect how you deal with your money and how you approach your money. So, for instance, you might not want to pay your bills, or you might not want to open envelopes, or you might put it off, or you just can't physically face doing it because of your own poor mental health. So the two things are really intrinsically linked, certainly with the money and mental health side of it. But as I say, it's like one of the four pillars, but it's also can be considered the foundation of overall financial well-being.
It's really interesting the way that you've described it in context. It's not just something that you need to think about almost, oh yeah, I need to remember to manage my finances. It's intrinsically linked to broader well-being. And really interesting what you said there about that connection with mental health and how that spiral can affect people, because redundancy has the potential to significantly impact mental well-being. And yeah, I think this is a really important topic to be talking about, and hopefully helping HR professionals think about this in line with not just when they're managing redundancies, but from a broader perspective as well in terms of the well-being for their organizations, which I know is something that you work with people on. And so that connection that you mentioned there about a financial shock and the connection between how people feel, their emotions, and their kind of spending habits, or maybe you should say reluctance to pay bills or overwhelm, I think that's a really important one for people to understand. And so when you talk about financial advice versus financial coaching, just talk about the difference, if you like, between those two, because as I know from my background, if anyone ever mentioned anything financial related in a redundancy process, I just would say you'll have to go and talk to the pensions people, or you'd have to go and talk to the benefits providers, etc., because you never want to be stepping across that line of advising. So what's the difference between advice and coaching, would you say?
Yeah, so I think the difference is what we would call advice versus guidance. And so when I was a financial advisor, I would spend quite a considerable amount of time with my clients, and we would take down all of their financial information, everything they've got. Then I would go away and write a recommendation. And the reason I say that is that the word is very important. I would tell people what to do with their money. So it was very important. I had a picture of their overall financial situation to be able to go and make those recommendations and give advice and tell people what to do with their money. It was up to them whether they took my advice or not. But ultimately, I would say, you've got this amount of money, you need to go and put it in XYZ. And this is how much you should put in XYZ. This is what you should invest in, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the difference with guidance is it's really about language. It's not telling somebody what to do. It's talking to them about what their options are. So it's very similar to coaching, as in probably if people are familiar with the GROW model, those kind of things, it's going through that process with people to look at what their goals are, what their situation is realistically, what their options are, the pros and cons of all of those options. And then it's entirely up to somebody to actually go away and decide if they want to act upon that themselves, or what options fit them. And it's non-regulated. So anybody can talk about and give guidance around money. The difference is very much language based, but also it's not saying, oh, Monzo, they do a really good deal on X, Y, and Z. You should go and have a look at that. Or you must go and speak to this person and transfer your pension to that person. So I think if you're thinking about your language and how you're talking to people and talking to them about different options and signposting them to credible resources, that does not fall into the advice side of things whatsoever. So then you find yourself talking about specifics, then you're probably falling into advice. But if you're talking in general and signposting people, then that's absolutely fine. And I did some work around what's in HR's remit and what's not in HR's remit. June, things like financial education and resources, that's not advice. So if you've got financial education and resources on your websites, on your intranet, or your pension providers, signposting people to that's not advice. Financial wellbeing policies within your organisation, or having a financial wellbeing policy, that's perfectly acceptable. Having access to financial counselling or coaching or advice with a expert, that's absolutely fine. And signposting people to that, and awareness training, all of those kind of things that you're not actually giving the advice or guidance is absolutely fine, but signposting people to them is fine. Doing surveys and assessing needs and things like that's all absolutely fine within HR's remit. And create, one of the things, and you mentioned it, is like creating that open culture about money and allowing people to actually ask the questions to be able to support them in the first place is again perfectly acceptable. But what you can't do is provide personal financial advice. June, you've just been made redundant. You've got this amount of money. I think you should go and put it into a medium risk fund. Managing people's finances. I have come across HR people who have wanted to help so much that they've attended like citizens advice meetings with people and gone through their statements and helped them create a budget. That's probably crossing the line to a certain, no matter how helpful it is. Tracking or requesting detailed financial information. We know that some regulated roles, I'm used to it, I have to provide bank details, credit reports, all of those kind of things if I want to be an advisor. over and above that, tracking what people are doing, unless it's part of your regulatory requirements, is a big no-go. And imposing financial choices on employees is another one. So all of you who are being made redundant, you've all got to go and open I'm going to use a different bank because I used one so earlier, but Lloyd's TSB bank and a Lloyd's bank, and you have to put all your redundancy in there. That again is crossing into advice.
That's a really helpful distinction there, Abby. And that piece around wanting to help and maybe, say, going along to citizens' advice or to asking someone who may be feeling financially overwhelmed, bring all your bank statements in and we can go through it together. I can understand where someone might be coming from with that, particularly if you've got someone who you think is vulnerable. However, what you said at the start there, it's about the language. So a suggestion might be for you to sit down with all of your bills, find a family member or a friend who can help you if you find that overwhelming. It's guiding, but you're not getting involved in any of that. So you can feel like you're supporting the individual, but you're not crossing any of those boundaries.
And I think that's the thing, is it once you're opening yourself up, aren't you, if you're getting involved into somebody saying, you told me. And when, even if it's there's lots of organisations, which we'll talk about in a moment, who can do that work for you and who can help and sit down and talk people through, who are qualified and credible. And a lot of them are government backed as well, and charities that can actually support people in the right way and be able to talk them through those kind of things if they are overwhelmed by it. So you don't have to do it, is what I'm saying. And as much as we want to help, sometimes helping is signposting rather than getting involved.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in a redundancy consultation process, what would you recommend from a financial well-being perspective in terms of best practice that anyone listening to this, you would want them to include? And again, it's about signposting, but what are some of the things that people can do to make sure that they're managing that really important pillar of financial well-being during redundancy?
I think make sure that the information is available. Actually, I'd take a step back from that, to be fair, to make sure it's an integral part of the consultation process and that people are aware that they can ask questions about their money. They can vent their concerns about their money, which gives you good data anyway, doesn't it? To be able to then work out what solutions are going to, I use the word solutions carefully, but what solutions might be suitable for people. And then you can start building on that, can't you? So once you know what people are asking and what they're worried about, I think it's having that awareness, isn't it, in the initial, that it is a big financial shock. People, they may have felt like, even people who've got things sorted or have an emergency fund still may feel that financial shock. And one of the things that I talk about is what influences our financial well-being, and where we're at in our lifestyle, in our life cycle, has a big impact on our financial well-being anyway. If suddenly something changes, then that can knock you off course, can't it? So I think first of all, have the awareness, but also to build into your consultation process, signposting and easily accessible information. So if you've got a benefits provider who's got some financial education, make sure that's really obvious to people that they've got that. There's lots of benefit providers who have financial coaching or financial education platforms that might be able to help. But it's making it easy for people to access, because people don't know what they don't know, do they, June? And again, when I've worked in organisations, one of the things I've come across a lot is that a lot of the financial support is obvious to HR and the people who set it up, but the engagement is low because people aren't necessarily aware of it. And once you make people aware of it and you bring it into part of your culture, then that means that people are able to access it easier. And I think if you're going through something like a consultation process for redundancy, and your money is going to be really a top concern of people and their financial well-being is a concern, make it really clear what you've got available.
And as you say, that kind of step back in that culturally, before any of this happens, best practice would be that financial well-being is part of that kind of the conversation. But yeah, making people aware of access to that support. And so in terms of some of the things that we talked about, boundaries earlier, what you can and can't do, and I think that was super helpful. But in terms of HR professionals who have people who are concerned about money, undoubtedly, as you say, even depending on where you are in your life cycle, There could be people who you might assume might not be concerned about money. Maybe you've got a director sitting in front of you, but you just don't know their personal circumstances, and neither should you be delving into them either. But I guess what I'm thinking about is, what can HR professionals do to support people who are really concerned about money without treading over and stepping over those important boundaries?
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about signposting, and there are some really great organisations out there which are also really under well known, if that's a way to phrase that. But there are some great organisations that can help. So the first one is, if people are worried about it and it's affecting their mental health, then organisations have mental health first aiders, and so that would be like maybe a first step. But and making sure that your mental health first aiders are clued up on some of the signposting around money, that's a good step as well. But you've got people like the Samaritans that you could add their telephone number in. And again, the Samaritans have got financial support people on their helplines. But the biggest one, which most people have never heard of, June, which is a really great resource for everybody, is Money Helper. It's an arm's length government organisation. It is paid for through the government, and Money Helper is a website, but it's not just a website. So you can speak to people, you can do text chat on their website, and they've got a huge encyclopedic knowledge base of all financial topics. So for instance, if you go on to Money Helper, and it is literally just www.moneyhelper.org.uk. In fact, if you just Google Money Helper, it pings up, because obviously it's a government one, so it's quite top of Google. It literally has anything that you can possibly think of. So if you type redundancy in, the first thing that pops up is a redundancy calculator, so you can check whether your redundancy is what you expect. The second thing is, do I need to pay tax on my redundancy? And there's a huge amount of articles just around redundancy. But then also they've got the benefits in there, so you can have a look in there and see what benefits you might be entitled to, what to do with your pension. So it's literally any financial topic that you can possibly imagine is covered in there, and it's government backed. So it's up to date, credible, and it's something that you can really believe in. The information is going to be correct for the people that you're signposting there. So that's a really great one. Now, if people are really concerned and they come to you and say, look, I'm really worried that I'm not going to be able to pay my rent on the first month that I'm made redundant, another really great organisation is Step Change Debt Charity. And they can offer help and advice on how to approach your providers, create a budget, what you need to do if you're in the position that you may not be able to pay some of your creditors. And if you think creditors is things like council tax, rent, mortgage, not just debt and credit cards, they may very well be able to help somebody who's about to be made redundant and may not be able to afford all of those things. They can put in place IVAs, they can advise you on bankruptcy, they can get you some breathing space. So there's something called breathing space, which means that you don't have to pay your bills for a few months. And that may very well be suitable for people who are being made redundant. So again, I can't recommend them. I can't recommend them highly enough. They are fantastic. They do some really good work and may very well be a really great toolkit. And June, I'll send you all of these links. And Citizens Advice Bureau. You can actually go into a Citizens Advice Bureau and get money guidance there and then on the spot. But the reason that I quite often include them is if you need food bank vouchers, you actually have to get a voucher from the Citizens Advice Bureau. You can't just turn up at a food bank and ask for, you actually have to go through the process and get a voucher to be able to do that. And that's where you go. So they're probably the main ones that I would incorporate in any communications maybe that you send out around the consultation process. If you're worried about money or you want to find out more information about redundancy and what that means to you, here is the Money Helper link. If you're worried about debt, here is the Step Change Step Change. If you're worried about your mental health, here's a list of our mental health first aiders and the Samaritans telephone number. So it's just there that people don't actually need to come and ask you.
Those sound like really helpful websites. And I love the fact that Money Helper is government backed. And so it's credible that you're referring people into up-to-date and authentic advice that they can go and get for their own personal circumstances. So to that point, we've been talking about the theme of signposting is what this is about.
Yeah.
So that sounds super helpful. My experience of redundancy was that I went to the job centre, as it was called then, because I had no reason not to go and find out if I was eligible for benefits. So I didn't make any assumptions that because I had been made redundant and because I had a redundancy payment, that would mean I wouldn't get benefits. So certainly something that we suggest to people that we work with is you might want to go and inquire at the DWP and see what might be available. Where else can people go to see what they might be entitled to from a benefits perspective?
So you can go onto the government website and type in all your details, but there's another website and it's called Entitled To, and to is in TO, entitled2.co.uk, and you can pop in all your details and it tells you which benefits you may or may not be available for. Even if you're working, it's worth going and doing that, because sometimes people are not earning enough and they're automatically eligible for some benefits. Things like single occupancy council tax, for instance, is one that quite often gets missed. And there is a huge amount of benefits. I think it's something along the lines of about 23 billion that are unclaimed every year. So Entitled To is a really good place to go and have a look. The government website is a little bit more tricky, and I think that's why they set it's an independent website up. So you just go in, pop in all your details, and then it will tell you what sort of benefits you're eligible to.
Wonderful, thank you. And we'll put the links to all of these in the show notes so that people can easily access them. And you mentioned this before as well, in terms of really bringing everyone together. So when you're in a redundancy consultation process, whether it be for 50 people or for 5 people, is looking to gather support from organisations that you're already working with. So your pension provider, EAP, that kind of thing. What else could someone who's embarking on a redundancy consultation process think about in terms of access to support that might be there, that they might maybe not know about, that they can bring in as part of this process?
There's definitely some organisations out there that offer things like salary advance and low-cost loans through organisations. So if you've got any of those, quite often as an aside, they also offer financial education and can support with that. Pension providers, you've mentioned, quite often offer some support, certainly around the pensions and redundancy. They might be able to offer workshops. And then there's specialists like me. I offer workshops. I mentioned upskilling your mental health first aiders to be able to have those conversations about money. That's something that I offer. There's other organisations out there as well that offer that upskilling around money for mental health first aiders. And it's just looking through your existing benefits pack, really, and finding out what you've already got. And if there are any expertise you can leverage from that already. As I say, the pensions one's a really good example. One that's not quite so well known is the salary advance companies. A lot of them do have financial education and financial wellbeing education as an additional benefit onto the salary advance. And again, it's just working with people to find out what they can offer.
So I think just wrapping things up, really, how would you summarise the approach that if you were coaching a HR professional who's about to embark on a redundancy process now and thinking about bringing financial well-being into that process, what would be some of your key sort of takeaways for people to really remember about what's important in this process?
I think sometimes it's forgotten, but it's interesting because over a long period of time, the employee/employer relationship has changed, hasn't it? Especially around money. It used to be very transactional. So you'd go to work, you'd do your hours, you'd get paid, you'd leave, you'd come in, you'd leave all your problems at home, you'd leave work and you'd leave all your work at work, and so on and so forth. But over the years, and certainly nowadays, that transactional relationship has changed completely, and people actually look to their employers for help with their overall well-being and are looking for safe, flexible, inclusive workplaces, which this is all part of that, making people feel safe when they're exiting the business is as important as when they're working for you. And they're looking for this help and support because they see their employer as a credible source of information. And so if you can provide credible information for people, that's only going to build, if you've got people within the business now, like long-term trust and loyalty. But when people are exiting, it means that they feel supported even in a hard transition.
Yeah, it's all part of that, managing that exit in the best way possible. And I talk a lot on the podcast about treating people with respect and empathy and compassion. And up until the very last day, they are a valuable member of your organization. And so how you manage that exit really matters. And so I've really enjoyed exploring how the financial wellbeing piece. So how can people find you, Abby, if they want to find out more about your financial wellbeing and what you can do for organizations?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, which is quite straightforward. And also I've got a very straightforward website. Address is www.abbybirch.co.uk.
Wonderful. I'll put those links in the show notes for people as well. And yeah, thank you so much, Abby. I know this episode is going to be super valuable. It's been really practical and really helpful. And thank you for sharing all your insights with me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Redundancy Matters podcast. I hope you found today's episode helpful. It would mean a lot to me if you would follow, rate and review this podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, as this helps it reach more people who are managing redundancies. Let me know what you thought, and if you have ideas for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on LinkedIn, June Hogan, and get in touch via my website, wildwoodcoaching.co.uk, where you'll also find more resources to help you manage redundancies. I hope you'll join me again soon for the next episode of Redundancy Matters.